For a long time, critics insisted that the oldest accounts in the Bible were nothing more than myths with no historical foundation. But modern archaeological excavations are revealing a very different story. Beneath the soil of Israel, pieces of a puzzle hidden for thousands of years have begun to emerge. We're talking about artifacts bearing names once dismissed as legends, secret wartime tunnels, and the exact locations of miracles that many believed could never be verified. What archaeology has uncovered beneath the dust of Jerusalem is silencing skeptics. Get ready to discover the physical evidence that no one can ignore. If you believe history matters, leave a like right now, and let's begin. The Seals of Hezekiah and Isaiah. What I'm about to show you is one of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries of the last decade. Two small clay seal impressions were unearthed during excavations at the Ophel in Jerusalem, just south of the Temple Mount. These artifacts are known as bulla. In ancient times, they were used to seal official documents, much like a king's personal seal. In 2015, the archaeological team led by Dr. Eilat Mazar made a discovery that stunned the world. First, they uncovered definitive evidence of a biblical king. The inscription on the clay was unmistakable, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. That discovery alone would have been extraordinary. Hezekiah is one of the most important kings in the Bible, remembered as the ruler who purified the temple and placed his trust in God when Jerusalem was surrounded by the Assyrian army. Finding his personal seal confirms that he was not a legendary figure, but a real king who governed Jerusalem during the 8th century BC. But the greatest surprise was waiting only about 10 feet away. In the very same archaeological layer, inside the same room, researchers uncovered a second seal. Although it was damaged and broken along one edge, one name remained clearly visible: Yeshayahu, the Hebrew form of Isaiah. The books of Kings and Chronicles tell us that the prophet Isaiah was King Hezekiah's closest advisor. They faced wars together. They prayed together. They lived and served during the same period. So what are the statistical chances of finding a seal bearing the name Isaiah only 10 feet from King Hezekiah's own seal, inside an area reserved for the royal administration? For archaeologist Eilat Mazar and many historians, these two discoveries strongly support the biblical accounts of Hezekiah and Isaiah. It is almost as if we had uncovered their workspaces side by side. These two small pieces of clay reveal that the relationship described in Scripture between the king and the prophet was not merely a religious tradition. It was also a historical and administrative reality. And if archaeology has confirmed the existence of these two towering figures of the Old Testament with such remarkable precision, what about the sacred writings they left behind? Did those texts survive the passage of time? That brings us to our next discovery: the Dead Sea Scrolls. The year is 1947. In the Judean desert, one of the driest and most unforgiving places on earth, a young Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed Dib is searching for a goat that has wandered away from his flock. He notices a cave high on the side of a cliff. To see whether the goat is hiding inside, he does what most of us would probably do. He picks up a stone and throws it into the darkness. But instead of hearing the bleating of a goat, he hears something completely unexpected: the sound of pottery shattering. That single sound would change the history of archaeology forever. The shepherd enters the cave and discovers a number of ancient clay jars. Inside them, there is no gold, no jewels. Instead, he finds aged leather scrolls covered in dust and written in an unfamiliar language. They are the Dead Sea Scrolls. To understand why this discovery was so important, consider this. Until that moment, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament dated to around AD 1000. That meant there was a gap of roughly 1,000 years between the time of Jesus and the oldest Hebrew Bible available to scholars. For centuries, critics and skeptics claimed that the Bible was like a giant game of telephone. They argued that after 1,000 years of handwritten copying, the original text must have been changed, altered, and manipulated. According to them, the Bible we read today could not possibly be the same as the one originally written by the prophets. But the discovery made by that Bedouin shepherd dealt a devastating blow to those claims. When scholars carefully unrolled the scrolls, they realized they were about 1,000 years older than any Hebrew biblical manuscripts previously known. They had been written between the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. These manuscripts dated to the time of Jesus, and in some cases, even earlier. Now comes the part that gives you chills. Among the nearly 1,000 texts discovered in the caves of Qumran was the Great Isaiah Scroll. Remember the prophet we discussed in the previous discovery? His entire book was there, preserved with all 66 chapters. When scholars compared that 2,000-year-old manuscript with the Bible you can read today, the results were astonishing. The text was virtually identical. The only differences were tiny grammatical variations, such as the spelling of a word or the use of a single letter. None of those differences changed the meaning of the message. This provided compelling evidence that Jewish scribes copied the scriptures with extraordinary precision, preserving every word across the centuries. That so-called broken telephone critics had long talked about simply never existed. Instead, the evidence showed that God's message had been faithfully preserved from the time it was first written. The shepherd who discovered the scrolls sold the first manuscripts for only a few dollars to a shoemaker in Bethlehem, never realizing he had uncovered the greatest archaeological treasure of the 20th century. Today, those manuscripts are considered priceless. They gave us remarkable confidence that the biblical text has been faithfully preserved. But even after the reliability of the scriptures was confirmed, one major historical question remained. The Bible describes a great kingdom founded by King David. Yet for many years, archaeologists could not find a single artifact bearing his name. Critics claimed David had never existed. They dismissed him as nothing more than a legend. But the answer had been lying beneath the soil of northern Israel, waiting to be uncovered. The Tel Dan Stele. For a long time, a shadow hung over the historical credibility of the Bible. It centered on one man, King David. You probably know his story. The shepherd boy who defeated the giant Goliath. The musician whose harp soothed King Saul. The warrior who united the tribes of Israel. David stands at the very heart of biblical history. Without him, Jerusalem would never have become Israel's capital. There would be no book of Psalms, and, from a theological perspective, the promised lineage of the Messiah would be broken. Yet until the early 1990s, many archaeologists regarded David as nothing more than a myth. Critics openly declared that David had never existed. They argued that he was a legendary figure invented centuries later to provide Israel with a glorious national origin. There wasn't a single coin, not a single stone, nothing outside the Bible that even mentioned David's name. Their argument was simple. How could such a great kingdom have existed if not even the founder's name could be found? Everything changed in 1993 at an archaeological site called Tel Dan in northern Israel. An excavation team led by Professor Avraham Biren was wrapping up another day's work. As the afternoon sun struck a black basalt stone that had been reused in an ancient wall, something caught their attention. The stone wasn't just construction debris. It bore markings, letters. After carefully removing the dirt, they realized they were holding a fragment of a victory stele, a monument erected by Hazael, king of Damascus, boasting of his military victories over neighboring kingdoms. The inscription was written in ancient Aramaic. It listed the kings Hazael claimed to have defeated. Then, on line 9, archaeologists found the words that forever changed the debate: House of David. The impact was enormous. For the first time in history, outside the pages of the Bible, the name David had been discovered, and it did not appear in an Israelite religious text. It appeared in the inscription of one of Israel's enemies. Think about that. An enemy king does not boast about defeating the dynasty of someone who never existed. He boasts about defeating the dynasty of a real king, a ruler powerful and famous enough that even neighboring nations recognized his name. The Tel Dan Stele demonstrated that David was not a mythical figure. He was a real king, a historical ruler who founded a dynasty recognized throughout the region during the 9th century BC. But if David was real, then the city he conquered, Jerusalem, should also bear unmistakable evidence of his royal dynasty. And one of his descendants, King Hezekiah, the very same king whose seal we saw earlier, left behind such an extraordinary achievement that you can literally step inside it and walk through history. Hezekiah's Tunnel. This is one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world, a feat so remarkable that it still leaves visitors in awe today. Imagine the situation. You are the king of Jerusalem during the 8th century BC. The Assyrian army, the most ruthless and unstoppable military force of its age, is marching toward your city. The surrounding towns have already been destroyed. The siege is imminent. Your city is protected by massive walls, but there is one critical problem. Jerusalem's only reliable water source, the Gihon Spring, lies outside the city walls in the Kidron Valley. If the Assyrians seize the spring, your people will die of thirst within days. So what did King Hezekiah do? He made a bold decision: bring the water inside the city. But this wasn't as simple as digging a trench. It meant carving a 533-meter, 1,750-foot tunnel through solid limestone beneath the city of David. And it had to be completed quickly, before the enemy arrived. To save precious time, Hezekiah ordered 2 teams of workers to begin digging simultaneously. One team started at the Gihon Spring, outside the city walls. The other began at the Pool of Siloam, inside the city. Their goal was to meet somewhere in the middle, underground, without GPS, without compasses, relying only on instinct and sound. It almost sounds impossible, yet today you can actually walk through that very tunnel in Jerusalem. The cold water from the Gihon Spring still flows through it, rising to your knees. As you make your way forward with a flashlight, feeling the rough, damp walls on either side, you begin to sense the urgency of that desperate moment. You can still see the marks left by ancient picks in the rock. And most remarkable of all, at the exact point where the 2 excavation teams met, the ceiling changes slightly in height, and the tool marks suddenly come from opposite directions. It is physical evidence of that extraordinary breakthrough. They succeeded. The water flowed safely into Jerusalem, filling the Pool of Siloam. The city survived the Assyrian siege led by King Sennacherib, exactly as described in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. To commemorate their achievement, the workers carved an inscription into the tunnel wall, known today as the Siloam inscription. It celebrates the moment when the 2 teams finally broke through to one another. The picks met, and the water flowed from the spring to the reservoir for 200 cubits. Discovered in 1880, it remains one of the oldest Hebrew inscriptions ever found. Now, let's leave this dark tunnel behind. We're moving beyond the kings of the Old Testament and into the most dramatic week in human history: the Passion of Jesus Christ, the Caiaphas Ossuary. This brings us to one of the most pivotal moments in the Bible, the trial of Jesus. For centuries, many skeptical historians looked at the gospel accounts of Christ's passion and dismissed them as dramatic storytelling. They argued that figures such as the high priest Caiaphas were merely literary villains invented by the gospel writers to personify Jesus' opponents. Perhaps, they claimed, no such man had ever existed with that name or authority. That theory collapsed in November 1990. Completely by accident. Construction workers were widening a road in a park just south of Jerusalem's Old City. Suddenly, a bulldozer struck something hollow. The roof of an ancient burial cave collapsed. When archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority arrived, they realized they had uncovered a 1st century tomb, dating precisely to the time of Jesus. Inside were 12 limestone burial boxes, known as ossuaries. To understand their significance, it's important to know how Jewish burial customs worked during the 1st century. Unlike today, the dead were not buried permanently in wooden coffins. Instead, the body was placed inside a burial cave for about a year. After the flesh had decomposed, the bones were carefully collected and placed into a stone ossuary, allowing the tomb to be used again. Most of the ossuaries discovered in the cave were plain and undecorated, but one stood out immediately. It was richly carved with elegant floral patterns and delicate rosettes, a clear sign that it had belonged to someone wealthy and highly influential. Then came the moment that stopped the archaeologists in their tracks. Engraved into the side of the ossuary, in Aramaic, were the words, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas." The inscription matched historical records perfectly. The 1st century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus identifies the full name of the high priest who presided over Jesus' trial as Joseph Caiaphas. The archaeological team realized they were standing before the burial place of the family of the very man who led the Sanhedrin on the night Jesus was arrested. The man who, according to the Gospel of Matthew, tore his robes and accused Jesus of blasphemy. Inside the ossuary, scientists found the remains of a man approximately 60 years old. The discovery of the Caiaphas Ossuary brought a powerful sense of historical reality to the events surrounding the crucifixion. This is not legend. It is not allegory. It is history. It involved real people whose tombs can still be examined today. But why was Caiaphas so threatened by Jesus? Because Jesus was far more than a preacher. He performed miracles that challenged both human understanding and the authority of the temple itself. And one of his most famous miracles took place in a public location that remained lost for nearly 2,000 years, until another unexpected discovery revealed the very setting of that event: the Pool of Siloam. What truly unsettled the religious leaders was not simply what Jesus said, it was what he did. The crowds followed him because they witnessed the impossible unfolding before their very eyes. And one of the most famous and challenging miracles described in the Bible is the healing of the man born blind. In John chapter 9, the scene is unforgettable. Jesus makes mud from the ground, places it on the blind man's eyes, and gives him one specific command: "Go, wash in the Pool of Siloam." The man obeys, he washes, and he returns with his sight restored. For centuries, liberal historians argued that the Gospel of John, written later than the other Gospels, lacked historical accuracy. They claimed that the Pool of Siloam was probably nothing more than a theological symbol, or perhaps the small Byzantine reservoir that tourists had visited for years. They doubted that a large public pool from the time of Jesus had ever existed with that name. They were wrong. Once again, the truth emerged because of an unexpected construction accident. It was 2004. Workers for the Jerusalem municipality were carrying out an ordinary repair job, fixing a broken sewer pipe in the southern part of the city of David. Suddenly, an excavator struck something solid. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't another pipe. It was a series of broad, well-preserved ancient stone steps. Archaeologists Eli Shukron and Ronnie Reich were immediately called to the site. As they cleared away the mud and debris, an astonishing discovery began to emerge. They had not uncovered a small ceremonial pool. They had found a monumental structure roughly the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools, surrounded on every side by wide stone steps. To determine its age, archaeologists relied on one of the most reliable forms of evidence available: coins trapped within the original plaster lining of the pool. Among them were coins from the reign of Alexander Jannaeus, dating to the 1st century BC, as well as coins from the first Jewish revolt in AD 66. This provided compelling evidence that the pool was fully operational during the very years Jesus walked through Jerusalem. The discovery completely changed our understanding of the miracle. The Pool of Siloam was not a hidden or isolated place. It was the city's great mikveh, a ritual purification pool where thousands of pilgrims washed themselves before ascending to the temple. When Jesus sent the blind man there to wash, he was doing far more than restoring his sight. I was sending him to the busiest public gathering place in Jerusalem. He intended for the miracle to be witnessed, to be public, to be undeniable. Today, visitors can walk down to that very site and sit on the same stone steps where that blind man washed his face nearly 2,000 years ago. It is a direct physical connection to the biblical account. The setting of the miracle still exists. But if archaeology confirmed the location of the miracle and the tomb of the high priest who judged Jesus, only one place remained to complete the story: the end of the journey, the place where everything ended and where everything began. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Every piece of evidence ultimately points to one location: the place where human history was forever divided, the place of the crucifixion and the resurrection. Today, if you visit Jerusalem, you might be surprised. You won't find a grassy hill beneath an open sky like the scenes portrayed in many movies. Instead, you'll enter an ancient, dimly lit church filled with the scent of incense. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. For centuries, many questioned whether this could truly be the place. How could Golgotha have been here in the middle of the old city, they asked. It seemed impossible that this crowded complex of stone buildings could mark the site of Jesus' crucifixion. But archaeology is not concerned with how a place looks today. It is concerned with what lies beneath the ground. And beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the earth tells the story of Good Friday with remarkable precision. Excavations have confirmed that during the 1st century, this area was an abandoned limestone quarry that had later been converted into a garden and a cemetery. Most importantly, at that time it stood outside the city walls. That matches perfectly with the biblical description in Hebrews 13, which tells us that Jesus suffered outside the city gate. But perhaps the strongest historical evidence came from someone who was not a follower of Christ. In AD 135, the Roman Emperor Hadrian sought to erase every memory of Jesus. He knew that early Christians gathered at the empty tomb to pray. So what did he do? He ordered the site to be buried beneath tons of earth and constructed a pagan temple dedicated to the goddess Venus directly above it. Ironically, by trying to hide the tomb, Hadrian permanently marked its location for future generations. Nearly 200 years later, after Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity, he ordered the Temple of Venus to be demolished. Beneath the Roman debris, the tomb was still there, preserved, waiting to be revealed. Then, in 2016, something happened that captured the attention of the entire world. For the first time in centuries, scientists working with National Geographic were granted permission to open the edicule, the small chapel that encloses the tomb. They carefully removed the marble slab covering the stone burial bed where the body of Jesus is traditionally believed to have rested. What they found astonished everyone. Beneath centuries of history lay the original limestone burial bench, still intact. The mortar supporting the marble slab was scientifically dated to around AD 345, confirming that this location has been continuously venerated since the Roman era. At this point, archaeology reaches its limit. It has shown us the setting. It has demonstrated that King David was a real historical ruler, that Hezekiah built the tunnel, that Caiaphas presided over Jesus' trial, that the Pool of Siloam truly existed, that the tomb dates to the 1st century, and that it stands empty. If the Bible has proven historically accurate in the details we can investigate, examine, and verify, then perhaps it deserves our trust in the truths that lie beyond what our eyes can see. Thank you so much for watching. May God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.